Dave Grassi. They've been called America's greatest generation. Young men, some as young as 15, who put aside the most formative years of their life to help defend freedom during World War II. Years that should have been spent going to baseball games, attending college, going out on dates, but instead they willingly put their lives on hold, put on a uniform, left their cities and towns for parts unknown, in essence saved America from the tyranny that was spreading across Europe and that had indeed come home on December 7th, 1941. This is their story. The Department of Veterans Affairs estimates that there are fewer than 1 million World War II vets still alive out of the 16 million that served during the war. And the VA also estimates that well over 400 die every day, and that by 2036 there will be no World War II vets left. You're going to meet some of these incredible people now. Listen as Staff Sergeant Bill Pace, a Purple Heart recipient, recalls his story about how he was forced to bail out of a B-17 bomber 5 miles up over Germany when his plane was struck, and then how he spent the last few months of the war in 2 POW camps in Germany. And Army PFC Lloyd Roush, who helped liberate the infamous Dachau concentration camp, and Staff Sergeant Mario Grassi, who helped liberate the notorious Wöbeln concentration camp. They'll describe for you the horrors, the sights, the smells that only a veteran who's been there and done that can describe. Army hero Tech Sergeant George West, recipient of the Silver Star for gallantry, and he'll relate how his citation calls when he became a one-man patrol when his unit was almost wiped out in Germany. You'll be spellbound by Navy veteran Vic Bucket, one of only a handful of survivors of the USS Indianapolis that was torpedoed by a Japanese sub during a top-secret mission, delivering the components of the atomic bomb that helped end the war in Japan. He'll describe for you his experiences during his struggle for survival over 4 days in shark-infested waters, watching as over 600 of his crewmates drowned or were eaten alive by sharks when their ship's distress signals were ignored. Their stories will undoubtedly invoke many emotions: pride, sorrow, even anger. But as our film progresses, I'm convinced that those emotions will compel you to watch and listen. For several of these vets, it's the very first time they've related their wartime experiences, but they've all agreed to be part of this most important historical and educational project. Hear now as these heroes tell their stories of their years spent in Europe, the Pacific, or in critical duties stateside. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bonita Springs Historical Society is proud to present Bonita's Greatest Generation in their own words.
My name is Bill Pace. I was in the 8th Air Force. I was a staff sergeant. I flew in the ball turret gunner. And I was in charge of all the armament on the plane whenever anything happened. The bombs also. If the bombs ever hung up, I had to go into bomb bay and kick them out. And I enjoyed every minute of the Air Force, and anybody who was looking at it, thinking about joining, go into the Air Force. As far as I'm concerned, it's the plane that won the war, the B-17. It is, and it's a known fact that the B-17 did win the war. It's got 4 engines. Pratt & Whitney engines are made in Southington, Connecticut. Pratt & Whitney is a big manufacturer. I'll tell you, the sky was black with flak. And I said, "So boy, something's going to happen." And my bombardier suddenly, well, we dropped our bombs, and we were going off. And the bombardier hollered out, "Pete, Pete." Pete was our pilot, our colonel pilot. He said, I see him. All of a sudden, there was a big crunching noise. And I said, holy jeez, I was in the ball at the time. Yeah. The lead pilot, Colonel Lucky Dolan, we were flying right wing to the lead. He was a radar ship, and they were concentrating on him with the anti-aircraft, really. And he was hit pretty bad. That's when the bombardier hollered out Pete. He saw that Dolan was coming over towards us and rolling, and he did land on top of us. And I was in the turret. Luckily, as soon as I heard the crunch, I swung, put my guns down, and Eddie opened up the door of my turret. And I just rose up out of, you know, the centrifugal force. Yeah. I rose up out of the turret. And I had, you know, this is another thing. This is the first time I ever wore a parachute.
For 11 previous runs, you
I never
put
did.
Your chute
I
on.
said to Eddie that day, when we found out we had a mission, I said, Eddie, I'm not very happy about tomorrow, this mission we're going on. And he said, oh, Bill, for God's sakes. He said, this is our 12th mission. I said, okay. He said, well, what's the matter? I said, I want to try to bring my parachute in the turret with me. He said, how the hell are you going to do that? He said, you need both your hands to fire the 50s. I said, I'll do it. I figured it out. Pilot, co-pilot, engineer, radio man, waist gunner, and the tail gunner were killed. It was I couldn't believe it. The bombardier and the navigator and myself were the only ones to get out. When I rose up from the turret into the waist, the plane was still in one piece. I had my chute with me, and it was dragging because I had cut the riser strap so I could get it in and cradled it on my arm. Anyway, I was dragging, and I was on my back, and I didn't know what to do because there was no exit. And all of a sudden, the plane broke in half. I was able to get out that way. Eddie, I was aware of somebody pushing me, and it was Eddie. He didn't have a chance. He didn't have his chute or anything, so he was pushing me, and that's the only thing I remember. And then all of a sudden, the plane was going down this way, and all of a sudden, it twisted, and I rose up out of it. And again, centrifugal force.
You're 30,000 feet.
Yeah. And my parachute was dangling there also. Anyway, I got free of the plane. I started falling. I didn't have a walk-around bottle either. You know, the walk-around bottle, oxygen. I said, I'm at 32,000 feet. I bailed out, and I'm falling. Now, I'm trying to put my parachute on while I'm falling. And actually, that's what saved my life. The fact that I was falling, free falling, you know, up in the atmosphere there. I had no lack of oxygen, but I didn't pass out because I was falling so fast. What is it, 120 miles an hour, right. Free fall?
6 miles up.
Yep.
Yeah.
And finally, it didn't get the chute on. The buildings and trees and everything were getting big. So I said to myself, Bill, you better pull the ripcord. And I pulled it, and it held, and I was dangling, you know, one strap, that's all.
Yeah. My good friend Bill Pace, thank you very much for your service.
Thank you, Dave. You're a great guy.
And thanks for participating in this project.
Oh, I enjoyed every minute of it.
Thank you.
Okay.
My name is Lloyd Roush. I was private first class. I was in the 33rd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, mechanized. I was 16 when the war started, and I went into college. I started college in January of '42, which is at age, I was still 16 at that point. So I didn't get into the Army until I was drafted, when I was 18. So I got 2 years of college in before I went into the Army. We were a reconnaissance outfit, so we were out in front of the Army. And after we left Munich, we didn't even know that Dachau was there. Sure. And we got there, we saw the barbed wire and knew immediately that it was a prison camp. But I didn't know, and none of us really knew, about concentration camps and seeing these walking dead, and then some just lying in the street and that were already dead. And it was, I'd never seen people that were so malnourished as this, and it was a scary operation. We just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And the German guards had left immediately before we got there, so we just opened the gates, and they were very happy to see us. There was a sergeant in our outfit that opened the boxcar that was in the camp, and he opened the boxcar and bodies came out and buried him. I mean, it was an experience that you'd never want to see. And then by 25 or 30 minutes after we got there, the Army followed us in. And when we saw these starved people, if I was older at the time, I wouldn't have gone into cavalry reconnaissance, because if I was older, I would realize reconnaissance means you serve in front of the Army. And that doesn't sound too smart.
Hey, Lloyd, thank you very much for your service, and thank you very much for participating in this project with us, sir.
Okay, I enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you.
And
Okay, my name is Mario Grassi. I served in the U.S. Army, and I was in the European Theater under George Patton, 3rd Army, 8th Infantry Division, and I was discharged, honorably discharged as a staff sergeant, and fortunate to come back without a scratch. The Germans were surrendering from the Russians. They were coming so fast from the Eastern Front to the Western Front, they wanted to get away from the Russians. So this major came up with 2 or 3 men, and he says, Americani. And at that time I was a sergeant, and I had 2 or 3 men with me, and they says, we want to surrender. He spoke fairly good English. And he says, well, okay, so he says he wants the ranking officer. So I says, I am the ranking officer. So at that time he gave me his Luger, and I asked him to have his 3 or 4 men leave their rifles down, and I asked one of my, either a PFC or a private, to take the major and the other soldiers back for questioning. So he took them back, and at that time I took the Luger, and I went to my captain and I said, sir, I says, this major surrendered us, and he gave me the Luger. I sent him back to be questioned to the division headquarters, so I want to turn the gun, and then he says, Mario, he says, you keep the gun. He says, as a matter of fact, I'm going to give you a certificate so you can take it back to the States when the war is over. So he gave me a certificate saying that the gun was handed over to me. He signed it and says, no military use, he can take it back. So I brought the Luger back with the certificate.
Thank you very much for your service to our country, and thank you very much for participating in this project.
And thank you for service in our country. Dave, I know you're a veteran of the Vietnam War, and it's a pleasure to be able to be here with you.
Thank you.
So when I went down there, I saw these 2 massive ships. Both of them were cruisers. One was the Nashville, and one was the Indianapolis. And they sort of went by alphabet, and I was lucky enough to get on to the Indianapolis. And I guess it depended on how many guys had different names and were assigned to the ships.
Yeah.
But I got on the Indy, and it was at midnight, and all of a sudden there was an explosion, and I used to sleep on the top of my desk. I was in the catapult tower, and it knocked me off my desk, and of course I figured, oh my God, we must have hit a mine, because they said there was no subs in the area. So all of a sudden there was another explosion, and I went down to the quarterdeck, and the men were just running all over the place, and Lieutenant Commander Lipsky was down there, and he was badly burned, and he was saying, you have to, if you could, help some of these men get their life jackets so that we're going to have to abandon ship. So I handed out jackets to some of the fellas that were close by, and then he said to me, "Do you have a jacket?" And I said, "No." I says, "The one I have is up in the tower." He says, "Well, you better go get it." And I did. I went up there and I went to get it and came down, and by the time I got down, the ship had rolled over on its side, and Lieutenant Commander said, "We have to abandon ship." So actually all we did was just to walk over the side of the ship into the water, and I swam out as far as I could because I knew the suction of the ship would pull you down. And I turned around, and one of the fellows said to me, "My God, look at it, it's standing straight up with the propellers going," and all of a sudden it disappeared. And all of a sudden there was a huge wave, and the wave just covered us all in diesel oil. We swallowed some of this, and this was horrible. For the first night or so, we had diesel oil on an empty stomach, and you couldn't get the diesel oil up, and it was just terrible. And one of the men said to me, "Do you have a jacket?" And I said, "Yes, I do." I said, "But I don't have it blown up." And he said, "Well, you hold on to me." And he said, "Blow it up and you'll be okay." So I did that. I blew the jacket up, and to this day, I don't know who this fellow was. He actually saved my life because I didn't have a jacket blown up, and without that jacket, you couldn't make it. We were little specks in the water, and hard for anybody to find. And it was just completely lucky that he was out there working on an antenna that he thought was broken, and he just was our angel. He spotted us. Of course, he didn't know whether we were friend or foe, and so he sent back, and then Lieutenant Marks came out, and they decided that to land. He decided to land his plane. He said there's too many people being eaten by sharks, and he landed his plane and he saved 57 men. I was on that ship under 3 different captains, and by far he was the nicest one of all. But at any rate, I worked on the Navy records there.
Victor, thank you very much for your service, and thank you very much for participating in this project with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you, sir. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you've enjoyed this program. It's been both an honor and a pleasure to help these vets tell their story, and the Bonita Springs Historical Society welcomes your comments. I'm Dave Grassi. Thank you.